So the sharing option is still not on.
Abhay, you can share your
Yeah,
PPT.
yeah. I've already done that. Guys, can you see my PPT and hear my voice?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. I think
Voice is
then
clear.
I think then we can start. It's 5:31, or we can wait a minute. We normally start at 5:32. Can you see the slide change?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So let's start then. Uh, a little tie back to what we have been doing in the last few classes. There is a human desire for improving one's life that is done typically by migrating. Criminal gangs exploit that desire and profit through exploitation of victims. And it's not just the migrants who are vulnerable to trafficking, but can any person in a state of vulnerability and if he or she comes in contact with a criminal or a criminal gang, can be a victim of trafficking. Various vulnerability factors include poverty and economic vulnerability, conflict, instability, gender-based violence, lack of educational, family dynamics. There are so as I was saying in the last class, any person, it depends on the situation. Any person is vulnerable based on a situation. And then there is a factor of demand, where there's a demand for cheap labor, commercial sex, which are typically the destinations for trafficked people. We looked at in the last class, we looked at modus operandi in recruitment to ensnare a victim to be trafficked, and it's also connected with the country of origin where potential victims are coming from. Typically, the global south, where there is a higher poverty rate, poverty becomes a great vulnerability factor. In transportation, traffickers are logistics specialists. They take indirect routes, not police routes. And also, we looked at the fact that how a lot of law enforcement aid and abet traffickers. End destination for trafficking victim is often one where diaspora community. So diaspora also has a role here, albeit a negative role, but it definitely has a role. It also depends on where the criminal gangs are operating, how they are networked. And today we've also looked at how internet is enabling, various traffickers in terms of logistics, in terms of identifying, trapping. Traffic victims experience various forms of violence and abuse while in traffic situations. Four forms of abuses: threats, denial of essential rights to movement of food, drink, medicine. And that is the only way they can control. That violence can be both physical as well as sexual. They are given drugs, substance abuse is common, withholding IDs, debt bondage frequently used to control individuals. In the morning class, we were talking about how this informal workers, manage in terms of times of crisis, in terms of medical emergency. They get into debt. And once they get into debt bondage is used to control individuals. Then they are sexually exploited. Bondage labor is there. Withholding of wages, excess working hours, and then there are specific sectors in which such traffic people are employed. In fact, we talked about in yesterday's class when Sophia mentioned Romania and the construction. We do not know whether traffic people are there, are they being exploited, because labor exploitation or forced labor is very common, especially where laws are lax. East European countries have lax laws. 70% victims experience psychological violence, 50% physical violence, and then, of course, there is a sexual violence, especially with female and minors. Not to talk about the fact that always females' sexual violence is very stereotypical. Men also experience sexual violence, boys also experience sexual violence. Okay, so let's look at identifying human trafficking occurs on an enormous scale worldwide, only a fraction. And why victims, fraction of victims are identified? Because nobody, no, there are no, people do not have tools, people do not know what to look for, how to identify a trafficked victim. How do they know whether the person who's there is trafficked or not? 0.4% of the victims were able to be identified. So unless you identify, you don't even know the scale of the problem. So, most of the estimations are based on rough calculations. Only about 40,000 of an estimated 27 million victims have been identified. Difficulties of data collection in the absence of any standardized identification tools. How do you know the person working in next door is trafficked or not? In spite of clandestine nature of trafficking, there are various missed opportunities to identify victims. And unless there is more talk about it, there are more upgradation of skills, not only of practitioners but of common people. Trafficking goes on. Yes, Domingos.
Yes, we are not seeing the PPT.
You're not able to see.
Yes, it's the first page till now.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Let me start again. Now is it moving?
Yes, sir. Now, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, as I was talking about the fact that only out of 27 million victims, 40,000. And again, how have people arrived at the 27 million? Possibly based on some extrapolation that if one person is identified if one person is identified, there are obviously 100 people who are trafficked and so on and so forth. There are various missed opportunities to identify victims. Domingos, is the PPT moving?
Yes, sir. Now in second part, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
For example, on the southern border, so there is a specific example which Bhabha and Smith in 2010 gave. Southern border of US with Mexico apprehends nearly 100,000 unaccompanied children, which are supposed to be screened for trafficking, but identification seems to be elusive. How do you identify? How do you screen? And also remember the fact, there are any law enforcement or any human trafficking practitioner is doing multiple jobs and then how do you identify? The Customs and Border Protection uses a screening question that cannot accurately determine traffic victim. And remember the fact that a traffic victim is under the spell of traffickers in terms of they are scared of physical, sexual, and psychological violence. So more often than not, they will not be answering a questionnaire correctly. So what are the tools to identify? 2011, India ratified the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, including its protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking. Trafficking in India specifically has been dealt with a number of laws, Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, bonded labor. In 2021, trafficking in person was introduced to provide a dedicated legislation which has still not been passed. So obviously, between an intent and a law, remember there has to be a law under which prosecutions need to happen. Then once a victim is identified, and then there is a question of prosecuting the trafficker. There is the court needs to send, the judiciary needs to understand the concept of trafficking. See, there is a big chain of events and there are multiple people involved. And unless there is an understanding, sensitivity, empathy, more often than not, neither the victim is aided or abetted or the trafficker is punished. And then, of course, there are people who are complicit in the crime. So it becomes that much more difficult to identify and convict a trafficker. How are victims identified? And this is the source is National Human Trafficking Hotline in the US. Signs of labor trafficking: feel pressured by employer to stay in a job, owe money to the employer, do not control of their passport or their identity, living and working in isolated conditions, cut off for interaction. More often than not, if a person is cut off from interaction with other people, that itself is a sign. It's a flag. It's a red flag. So in case you get a question which says, how are victims identified? You can split it up into labor trafficking and sexual exploitation, two large areas of trafficking. Then appear to be monitored by another person when talking, threatened by the boss with deportation, working in dangerous conditions, living in dangerous, overcrowded, or inhuman conditions. So you are trying to speak to a person. There is somebody who's constantly keeping a watch or hovering around. Signs of sex trafficking: want to stop participating in commercial sex but feel scared, disclose that they are reluctant to engage in commercial sex, someone is pressurizing them, live where the work, or are transported by guards between home and workplace, children who live with or are dependent on family members with a substance use problem or with an abusive parents. Now, also understand these may not be a short shot leading to a traffic victim, but these are signs. As I was telling, specific signals give out red flags. Then the practitioner needs to identify or delve deeper to figure out if the person has been trafficked or not. Have a pimp or manager in commercial sex industry, work in industry where it may be common to be pressurized into, for example, the bar girls of Mumbai. So not all of them would have been trafficked. There might be some who fell into a trap but were not trafficked. Actually, have a controlling parent, guardian, romantic partner, or sponsor who will not allow them to meet or speak with anyone alone, or who monitors their movements. So inevitably, these are signs. As it's written, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, these are signs. Based on the signs, you proceed forward. Work in industry may be common to be pressurized into. Oh, okay. That is a duplication in slide. Identification of traffic system is done by legal and administrative frameworks put in place by various countries. And that is where it's very important to have a legal and administrative framework, because in the absence of which things are ad hoc. local, state, national police, prosecutors, social workers, healthcare practitioners, child protection staff, labor inspectors, immigration and border. So it's quite a complex web of people who identify victims. And unless training is given to such people, unless they're because modus operandi keep on changing, unless their skill sets of these practitioners are upgraded, they have tools to detect, more often than not traffickers get pass out with traffic victims without these people knowing. Identification is a process where an individual is identified as a traffic victim by relevant practitioner. Can be reactive when a victim seeks self-identifies as a traffic victim and seek assistance. Now, in this, you have to consider another area where there could be deceit, where a person wants to uh, is trying to cross illegally and wants to be identified, or a traffic victim does not want to be identified because of the fear of traffickers, is proactive when the practitioner identifies a traffic victim in the course of their work. So it can be reactive and proactive. Based on signals and indicators from the victim through observation and interaction. And as soon as it is about observation and interaction, the practitioner needs to be trained. Consenting ones refer to further assessment as well as assistance and protection. Official determination of a traffic victim leading to a voluntary referral for assistance, reintegration, or legal remedy. So, A, it is very clear that A, the practitioners need to be trained and skilled. B, the government alone cannot do this. They need to involve community organizations, NGOs, etc., because the scale at which it operates is huge. It is an involved and subjective process. And the threshold for victim identification varies substantially for country to country, along with rights and protection afforded to the traffic victim. Large number of traffic victims remain unidentified. And we had already seen in a couple of the last units that more often than not, a traffic victim is booked under a different legal clause, because the legal practitioner does not know about trafficking. Now, you can expect a policeman on the road or on the beat and trying to understand trafficking. Multiple reasons why a traffic victim may avoid identification, may even decline to be identified. So there are obviously reasons. Human being is pretty complex that way. There are cases who those initially decline identification and assistance may change their mind. Or who initially identify as traffic, later change their mind, say, no, we are not. We were forced to say that we are traffic victims. And that can be because of many factors. Process differs in case of traffic children, because there is an additional protection obligation. Now, there are some people who might appear children, but they are not children. So there has to be a definition of the age specific definition of a child. So the correct route is to involve child protection authorities You need to have a child protection authority who's trained in trafficking children, who identifies, understanding, and as we said, it's a subjective and an involved process. So what are the issues and challenges in identification of traffic victims? Two main themes: traffic victims' experience of identification and structural and institutional challenges of identification. And these challenges are not mutually exclusive. And issues are context specific and change over time. So there is no solution which fits all. And if a law enforcement or a practitioner is looking at one solution fitting all, it will not happen. So let's look at what is experience of identification. Aspects like fear of trafficker and authorities. So look at the fact in the current crackdown on immigrants in the US. Suppose a person has been trafficked and is in the US. Now, in case the person identifies as trafficked and gets stuck with the immigration and customs, he goes into detention. In fact, with the trafficker, he or she is much more safer than with the detention center. So that person would typically not like to be identified or come forward. Victims are generally fearful at identification or refuse to be identified. Victims also fear reprisals against co-workers or other if they escape. For example, a lot of places, these traffic victims fear reprisals against their families back home, because inevitably when they were trafficked, there was a local gang which picked them up. And if there is a local gang, they know the families. Threat, fear of authority is also ingrained in the victim by trafficker, warning victims of possible arrest and deportation. Where authorities have not believed the victims, or the victims have been criminalized and brutalized. So you go to an authority and say, I've been a trafficked, I've been forced, and the authority actually criminalizes or brutalizes you. See, when a politician makes a political rhetoric of migrant being, being parasites, or migrants being, living off the system. Now, this is, criminalizing them. And then, law enforcement comes and brutalizes. For example, which is typically the case of men and boys who have been sexually abused. You try and walk into a police station as a male and say that you have been sexually abused, more often than not, the law enforcement officer will not understand or will make fun of you. Physical and psychological impacts of trafficking, uh, an issue in victim admitting to be trafficked. There is a stigma in admitting to the fact that you have been trafficked. Again, with men and men specifically, it goes against their grain to admit that they have been trafficked. Like, how could they be so stupid to be trafficked? Exploitation seriously impacts victims, physical as well as psychological, which influences their decision in identification. With trafficked children, particularly vulnerable. The children become so scarred that very difficult to identify. I hope I'm not going too fast.
No, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Many victims show symptoms of PTSD, depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, lack of confidence. Obviously, they have been tortured to control them. When they have been tortured to control them, abused, both physical and sexual, as well as not given food, bad conditions to live in, there will be all these psychological disorders, signs of confusion, disorientation, fear, inability to understand assistance, and then they are generally suspicious of everybody. Other factors include shame, being ashamed or embarrassed to have been deceived, being forced to engage in criminal or sexual act, embarrassed, you fail to earn money for families back home, not having received unpaid wages, realizing their family. Now think about the fact, a curable disease like TB or cancer today puts a lot of stigma onto families that they don't disclose the illness. COVID was one particular example where there was a stigma attached. This family has COVID or this patient has COVID. Similarly, trafficked victims, families go through stigma, or sexual and labor exploited families go through stigma against by the community back home because of them being victims of trafficking. Rape families go through this stigma that there has been a rape which has happened, and it is not a nation specific, this is a worldwide phenomenon with human beings. Scenario where identification process does not offer what the victim wants and needs. Identification leads to discomfort. Process of screening procedure which is stressful can lead to physical and mental harm. Then of course, if the identification does not lead to any assistance, there's no advantage for victim. So if the identification does not lead to possibly a refugee status or a job or money, it is of no use to the victim. In fact, identification exposes the victim to unnecessary stigma, reducing the victim's chances of settling in a new and a better situation. Remember, in the first go, the idea of being trafficked was to the deceit of getting into a better situation. Identification reduces the chances of victim exiting from an exploitative situation because now the victim is marked both by law enforcement and trafficker. Situation where some victims are asylum seekers, and identification as a victim reduces their asylum claims. So now you get stuck into a different cycle. Because being identified as a traffic victim then ensnares you into a legal system, and more often than not, remember, the victim is in a strange place, in a strange culture, in a strange language, and unless there is somebody hand holding the victim, the law enforcement or the practitioners are not really able to help because these are government functionaries. Identification will also lead to compulsory assistance for a long period, making the victim stay away from family without any option to work, with many victims opting to be deported as irregular migrants rather than being forcefully assisted as trafficked victims. So, being identified has its own challenges and nuances. Identification puts victim in a witness criminal justice proceeding. Stressful. Because remember, the victim is already in an exploitative situation. And more often than not, most people avoid a criminal justice system. Nobody wants to be put up in a stand to identify traffickers. And then remember, they have families, they have other loved ones, they are scared, and then they are dealing with criminal gangs who have various law enforcement on their payrolls. There are also cases where individuals of trafficking don't see themselves as victims, rather unlucky, or see it as their fate. Some come from environments where exploitation is normal, with exploitation in traffic situation not marked different from their early experiences. Cultural norms and language becomes a barrier. Influence pers- look at it. Let's say for an Indian who believes in the whole concept of karma, they might justify trafficking or forced labor as their karma because of bad because of the sins they did in their last birth. Now it's a cultural construct. In fact, a lot of bonded labor which was released in India typically were working in plain sight, and they attributed it to their karma. Cultural shapes behavioral norms like discussion on topics of sexual violence, tolerance of violence, with fate, karma, inhibiting victims to disclose about their trafficking experience. It's a cultural norm. Language is a huge barrier in identification. Affects ability to apply various indicators. Interpreters are not readily available, affordable, or sensitive to trafficking situations. Many authorities relying on victims' court travels for interpretation, often who are traffickers, leading to misidentification. And remember, the trafficked victim is more often in a foreign culture with foreign language. And more often than not, the trafficking practitioner who's trying to identify does not know the language and is doing multiple work or has not been adequately trained. The second aspect is the structural and institutional challenges. One is the hidden nature of trafficking. Some victims working in plain sights of authorities go unidentified. As I said, you have a construction site right in front of you. How would you know that the person are being forced to work or are being paid decent wages? There is no way to find out. including the fact a lot of trafficked victims are there in distant places in rural areas where authorities are not there. Then biases, assumptions, and misconceptions. In many countries, focus is on victims of sexual exploitation, other forms of exploitation not being registered. Sexual exploitation, stereotypical and gendered understanding is detrimental to identification. So, for example, everybody assumes the fact that it's only the girls and women who are sexually exploited. The boys and men are missed out, or LGBTQ individuals as victims.
Sir,
Yeah,
sir, regarding the victim assistance in state of Punjab, we have anti-human trafficking cells at the district level.
correct.
The districts, those are more prone to particularly Malwa, Punjab, Moga, Faridkot,
Okay,
and Bathinda also, sir,
okay,
where illegal migration or human trafficking possibilities were more. About 10 years back, it was there at almost in all the districts.
okay.
Sir.
Okay, so that's a news which Gurpreet is giving us. There are these anti-trafficking cells which have been instituted by the Ministry of Home. Again, it all depends on the motivations of the cells, the personnel on the cells, the focus of the state government or the focus of the bureaucracy, plus their training and motivation. For example, after these women from Punjab were identified in who were trafficked to the Middle East, there has been a spur in identification of travel agents. So inevitably, these are more ad hoc measures rather than policy, unless there is a policy and somebody is focusing on that. Because remember, governance is complex, and especially in a country like India, which is so huge, and I keep repeating this, country like India, which is so huge and diverse, obviously there are so many issues, so somebody needs to concentrate on this particular issue, calling it a priority issue. And wherever there are specific personnel who give priority to it, give focus, train their people, you will see a much better result than in states, when I say states, internal states or countries where there is laxity. So Gurpreet, are they still working very effectively, these anti trafficking cells?
Sir, yes, working, but later on some other factors were also due to just like mass migration, sir. The
Okay.
island centers. In the year 2023, sir, about 4.27 lakhs 10 plus 2 students were migrated from Punjab to Canada only in
Oh,
one country.
okay,
So
okay,
that was the second phase. Now
okay.
that has been slowed down, and the admission in schools and colleges after 10 plus 2 has been little improved also.
Okay, okay, okay.
Sir.
So you see, there are multiple factors which make people vulnerable, which lead to migration or which leads to situations of trafficking. There are so many, as I keep talking about, engines working at the same time. Victims' behavior and attitude of hostility to being identified, misconception in practitioners of these people being actual victims. So inevitably, there is a person who's confused, who's a victim, who's confused, who's aggressive. The practitioners might feel that this person is trying to, be over smart or something of that sort, which leads to a missed opportunity of identification. Whether the victim was really forced or worthy enough to be a victim, depending on the degree to victim entered exploitation knowingly. Now, these are biases. Remember, human beings. The practitioner first is a human being, and human being works with biases and misconceptions. So I have read media reports about girl going to a police station for reporting of rape, and the policeman says, who's going to rape you? in terms of, a bias in terms of whether the person is worthy enough to be trafficked, or worthy enough to be raped, or worthy enough to be sexually exploited. Now these are misconception and biases, and this typically leads to victims not being identified. Insufficient knowledge, skills, and sensitivity of people in charge, and this becomes a very important factor. So as I said, the average beat constable on the road, how much does he know about trafficking? How much does he know about the various types of trafficking? How does he Has he been given any tools to, when he goes on a beat around his area, is he able to spot if there is a traffic victim, including border guard, immigration officers, child protection staff, healthcare practitioners, receive little or no training to identify traffic victims. And this is a generic, because remember, national governance is complicated. There are so many issues at stake. Who is giving priority to this particular aspect? And then there are changes in modus operandi. So who is upgrading the skills? Lack of awareness of the crime and its magnitude. Disconnected with people who are trained and ones who are in the business of identification. Practitioners hold multiple responsibility, low priority given to trafficking. So again, as I said, where is the focus? Who's giving the focus? Is there a central monitoring place? Are the people trained? Are they upgraded in their skill set? It is again a complex issue. Sensitivity of authorities, not only being able to recognize signals, but also screen and interact with victims. Who has the time? Screening process looks more like an interrogation rather than a screening. Negligence, maltreatment, abuse of power, extorting money, sexual favors from victims. So there was this news item of a rape victim going to a police station and the policeman raped her. So these come under the structural and institutional challenges of identification. So in case you have a question which says what are the various challenges associated with victim identification, you can split it up into experiences and structural challenges and give the subheads. Issue and excess of information about identity. So if a beat constable is sensitive, understands trafficking, identifies a trafficked victim, what does he do next? Does he have the information to proceed? Who does he refer the victim to? Often victims do not receive clear and comprehensive information in their rights and options. So, you have to determine the victim's literacy levels, analytical skills, decision-making skills, language, culture. It is quite complicated that way. And then, of course, there is the insufficient screening tools. How do you screen? How do you know that the person is trafficked? Tools and procedures are available, but practitioner involved has not been properly trained. No, many tools and procedures are not publicly available. What are tools and practices? So you find a person who is working on a construction site. Will you go and ask, are you being forced? No. or how do you ask? So that has been defined in terms of tools. There is the way, you look at signs, you look at how the person interacts when you ask a question, you look at who's around when the person is working. So those tools and procedures are important. Tools and resources out of date, reflecting biases and assumption no longer prevalent. There's also cases when a person may not be trafficked but still needs protection. So now a practitioner is supposed to grapple with all this. And remember, most of these practitioners are low-paid government employees or NGO staff. They have not been properly motivated. They do not have resources, and then they are supposed to go out and deal with a complex thing like human trafficking, which involves criminal gangs. So this fall under structural and institutional challenges of identification. These get further complicated during times of mass migration, like in a crisis or conflict settings with forms of trafficking and exploitation. Uh, this Myanmar, this earthquake, mass movements of people. Or riots, for example, what happened with the Rohingyas, mass movement of people. So that is infiltrated with other people, with criminal gangs, with smugglers. How do you screen victims? With existing tools and procedures. For example, in Africa, in Sudan, there is a civil war going on. People are being displaced. How do you screen? Geographical and practical barriers to identification. Metropolitan locations have more resources, whereas victims are more in rural areas. And then the victims do not have money and resources to seek help. Lack of community-based identification opportunities. The community just look around. The community hardly understands trafficking. Most communities across the world do not understand trafficking because there is not enough media space on trafficking, talking about it, the laws. Why is it wrong? So let's look at some of the legal obligation in traffic victim identification. The UN Trafficking Protocol, first legally binding instrument, then the UNOHCR recommended principles and guidelines on human rights. The whole aspect of human rights brought in, a leg up onto various issues on trafficking. Guidelines have been developed in order to protect practical rights-based policy guidance. Now, these also come under threat with the latest, going after immigrants in the US, for example. US was taking a lot of, leading in terms of all these steps. Now that's going to, suffer. UN Conventions on the Rights of Child, 89, UNICEF Guidelines on Protection of Child Victims, 2006. And remember, these were international conventions, covenants, which gave individual countries, the way, the guidelines to form their local laws. And besides the UN conventions, there were the local convention, like the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, ACWC Gender Sensitization Guidelines, because inevitably these multilateral guidelines then allow, or UN guidelines then allow nations to form their own policy, bring out legal laws under which then trafficking victims are identified, assisted, aid given. Okay, let's sum up. Process whereby individual is identified as traffic victims by relevant practitioner can be reactive when victim self-identifies, or proactive when practitioner identifies a traffic victim. Challenging task, it's not a straightforward task. It's challenging. Most traffic victims are first identified by local police officer or a member of community service. Important to educate communities about trafficking, including its prevalence, subtypes, warning signs. These need to be taught more often. While governments have made strides, community-based or grassroots efforts have often been more effective at providing immediate response of prevention and identification. Community organizing underlying critical roles of citizens and social service agency. Government, any place in the world, is not big enough or having enough resources to, to do so many things. And that's where community-based organizations, NGOs, become important. Two themes, experience of identification and structural and institutional challenges. And one has to work on both. There are some references in the SLM. There are more references if you, in case you would like to read them. Let me stop share. And any questions?
Thank you, sir. Very interesting topic.
Gurpreet, in fact, the whole human trafficking and its associated, issues around it are actually very interesting.
Sure.
Domingos, any question?
Yes, sir. What I see now, I'm saying not about only India, even in my own country, we don't have more information about that. Even someone is traveling the first time, and when they reach the border, we don't have information like banners and some information like if you are trafficked, call for this number or contact that office. Yeah, maybe last time I was seeing that this is small question, but now I'm seeing that this is most important to make policies and get more information. Yeah, because the border are more vulnerable now, and we don't have more information. Even
So-
when I'm coming to India, I don't see any banner, any information in the border. Like if you are trafficked, please contact this number or go to that office. We don't know if every day someone is trafficked.
Correct.
The borders don't have this information.
So Domingos, than it has to happen on multiple levels. So information is one, mobilizing community-based organizations is second. But look at the fact, if information is available and community-based organizations are mobilized, is the structural and institutional mechanism in place? So what happens if if the border guards identify a traffic victim? Who do they go to? So unless, and then if they go to somewhere, is there a legal framework in place for, the next steps?
Really,
So, and that can only happen when the government, right from the top, is able to take this seriously and start making a policy or talking about it, because just talking and information also leads to nothing, because I have the information, I'm identifying, then I do what?
Yes. Right, sir.
So you see, it happens on multiple planes, and it has to again start with the nation or the nation government or the see, again, look at the fact, if political parties in a nation themselves are unaware of the problem,
Yes.
then obviously why would they put focus in trying to legislate on this particular thing? Look at the fact that in India, the law was being brought in 2021. It's been 4 years. It's still not become a law. So again, it has to do with focus. It is obviously on multiple levels that it needs to be done.
Right, sir. Maybe you can do something because I know now that this is a huge problem. And
Maybe why don't you can start by possibly writing a op-ed about trafficking, let's say, pick up some pieces after your exam, or whenever you have the time, pick up some pieces out of Africa. Africa is a major battleground in terms of trafficking. A lot of Africans are being trafficked, obviously because of vulnerability factors like civil wars, poverty, and all that stuff. So possibly you can look at start with Africa as a continent, and it's a huge continent with multiple states. You can write an op-ed in your local newspaper. Maybe that brings out certain, somebody gets to look at it, and build some information and consensus in politics and so on and so forth. There are multiple ways to go about it.
yes, sir, I will do it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, so in case there are no questions, let's call it a day. It's been 2 days of various lectures. Saturday, Sunday is the only time a lot of you might be working. You get the time. So that's why I quickly wrap it up, so that, and keep it simple, so that you are having time for your families or whatever you wish to. Have a wonderful week ahead. We'll meet each other next Saturday for MDI 7. Enjoy yourself. Bye bye then.
Thank you so much, sir.